My son-in-law shook my hand at the door that evening, and I noticed he was wearing my father's watch. Not a watch that looked like it. My father's watch. The one I had kept in the cedar box on top of my dresser for 31 years. The one with the small crack in the crystal above the 6, the one my mother had given him the Christmas before he died, the one I had worn exactly once, to bury him. I said nothing. I stepped inside and let my daughter take my coat. The house smelled like roast chicken and something floral I did not recognize, a candle or a diffuser, the kind of smell meant to make a place feel warmer than it was. My daughter, Renee, had set the dining table with the good dishes, the cream-colored ones she had taken when she and Brendan moved into this house 4 years ago. I had not said anything about that either. She had asked if I minded and I had said no, because they were just dishes, and because she had looked so hopeful when she asked. I hung my jacket on the hook by the door. Force of habit. My own hook at home was in the same position, just inside, to the right. "Dad, you look tired," Renee said. "Long drive," I said. It was not a long drive. 40 minutes from Sudbury, down Highway 17, through the spruce corridor that turns gold in October. I had driven it hundreds of times. But she was not really asking about the drive, and I was not really answering about it either. Brendan Sutter was already back in the kitchen by then, lifting the lid on something on the stove and dropping it again like a man performing the idea of cooking. He was 38 years old and managed a commercial property portfolio out of an office on Durham Street. He wore good shoes always, even on weekends, even at home. Even, apparently, when he was stealing a dead man's watch. I sat down in the living room because no one told me not to. There were 2 new chairs by the window, gray linen, still stiff. The old blue couch my daughter had brought from our house in Hammer was gone. I had reupholstered that couch myself 20 years ago, in the garage, with a staple gun and fabric my wife had picked out from a bolt at the fabric land on LaSalle. It had taken me an entire weekend. My wife had brought me coffee each morning and said I was making a mess of it, but she had smiled when she said it. That couch was gone and I did not ask where. My name is Lawrence Prout. I am 66 years old. For 38 years I worked as a heavy equipment operator and later a site supervisor for a civil construction company out of Sudbury. Roads, bridges, drainage, the kind of work that nobody thanks you for until the road washes out and then they wonder why it was built that way to begin with. I retired 3 years ago with a pension that covers the basics and a house that has been paid off since my daughter was in high school. I drive a 2012 F-150 that I bought used and maintain myself. I am not a complicated man. My wife, Carol, died 6 years ago. Ovarian cancer, caught too late. She was 58. She had been the one who could walk into a room full of strangers and come out knowing 3 of them by name and 2 of their children's birthdays. Without her, I became quieter. I do not think that is unusual. I think some men are only legible in the context of the person who knew them best. Renee is our only child. She was 24 when her mother died and it hit her hard, the way it hits people who are not yet old enough to believe that parents are mortal. She leaned on Brendan heavily in that time. They had been together for 2 years at that point, and I think she mistook the steadiness he showed during the funeral arrangements for a deeper kind of character. Brendan is organized. He is good at logistics. I do not think those things are the same as being good. They married 14 months after Carol's funeral. I walked Renee down the aisle in a rented hall in Garson, and I meant every step of it. When Brendan shook my hand at the reception he said, "She's in good hands, Lawrence." I had nodded and believed him, because I wanted to, and because it was easier than the alternative. That was 4 years ago. Now he was wearing my father's watch and I was sitting in a chair I did not recognize in my daughter's living room, waiting for a Sunday dinner I had been invited to with a text message that said only, Sunday 6 o'clock. Important. Please come. Not love you, Dad. Not hope you can make it. Just the time and a word that had been sitting in my chest like a stone since Tuesday. Important. I had spent the drive down trying to decide what it meant. Renee was pregnant. I had thought that first, the way a father thinks, with the quick bright hope of it. Then I had thought of medical news, the kind you deliver in person because you cannot say it in a text. Then I had thought of money, because the way Brendan lived had always suggested a man spending just slightly ahead of what he earned. The shoes. The restaurant they had taken me to for my last birthday, the kind of place with a menu that had no prices on it, which I had always thought was a way of making sure you felt uncomfortable asking. The renovation they had done last spring on the mudroom and the back deck. I had not been able to land on anything certain. So I had driven down and said nothing about the watch and was now sitting in a gray linen chair that felt like a waiting room. Renee came in with a glass of water I had not asked for and set it on the side table. She was wearing a blue sweater and she had her mother's way of tucking her hair behind her ear when she was about to say something she had rehearsed. She tucked her hair behind her ear and then did not say it, whatever it was, because Brendan appeared in the doorway and said dinner was ready. We sat down. Renee served chicken, roasted potatoes, green beans. Everything tasted fine, the way food tastes when you are not really tasting it, when part of your attention is being held somewhere else. Brendan talked about a development project in Timmins. Permits, assessments, a contractor who had not shown up. He had a way of talking about his work that positioned every obstacle as evidence of other people's incompetence and every success as evidence of his own foresight. I had noticed this early and said nothing. Renee listened to him the way she had always listened when she wanted to seem more interested than she was, the way Carol used to call polite attendance. I ate and I looked at the watch on his wrist when he reached for the salt. It was my father's watch. The crack was there. I was not mistaken. My father had been a miner. He had worked at the Levack mine for 33 years and come home every day smelling of sulfur and machine oil and had never once complained about it in my hearing. He had given me that watch the week before he died, pressed it into my hand without ceremony, the way he did most things. "You'll know what to do with it," he said. I had not known what to do with it. I had put it in the cedar box and kept it there, because some things are too heavy to wear. I did not know how Brendan had gotten it. That box was in my bedroom in Sudbury. I had been in this house twice in the last 6 months. I did not recall showing it to him, mentioning it, or leaving that room unlocked. Renee refilled my water glass. She still had not said whatever she had come to say. I could feel it the way you feel weather changing, the particular pressure in the room. Brendan set down his fork. He looked at Renee and she looked at him, and she looked at the table, and then he looked at me. "Lawrence," he said, and he used the voice he used when he was about to be reasonable at someone. "We've been talking," he said, "about some options. For the future. For everyone." I waited. He had a particular way of building toward things, Brendan did. He liked to establish reasonableness first, lay it out like a foundation, so that whatever he was about to put on top of it seemed structurally sound. "The market up in Sudbury has been strong," he said. "You know that better than I do. Lots and Hammer are selling fast. A guy on my end sold a bungalow on Fielding last month for $422,000. Which is, honestly, remarkable for that area. Houses are selling," I said. "They are. And I've been thinking." He paused and reached for his wine glass. The watch caught the light above the kitchen. "You're 66. The property taxes alone on that house are going up every year. And you're maintaining it solo, which, I mean, you're capable, obviously, but it's a lot of upkeep for one person." Renee was looking at her plate. "The house is fine," I said. "I'm not saying it isn't." He smiled the way he smiled when he was being patient. "I'm saying there might be a smarter use of that asset. For you. For your retirement security. For everyone's peace of mind." I looked at my daughter. She was turning a piece of potato over with her fork and not looking up. She had tucked her hair behind her ear twice in the last 30 seconds. "What are you asking, Brendan?" I said. I did not say it like a question. He leaned back. He put one hand flat on the table, the way men do when they want to seem open. "We've been looking at some numbers," he said. "If you sold the Hammer property, cleared a clean number, and moved somewhere more manageable, a condo, something low maintenance, you'd be liquid. You'd have security. And..." He glanced at Renee. "We've also been looking at our own situation. The Timmins project is capital intensive right now, and the bank has us stretched on the mortgage. If you were in a position to put some of that equity toward a family investment, we could structure it properly. Something that benefits all three of us." I sat with that for a moment. 38 years of operating equipment. The house in Hammer bought in 1991, when Renee was 4 years old and Carol had just gone back to work part-time at the elementary school. The mortgage paid off in 2009, during the recession, because I had worked every piece of overtime they offered and Carol had taught evening literacy classes 2 nights a week and neither of us had bought anything we did not need. My father's shed, still standing behind the house. His tools still on the pegboard, outlined in the black marker he had used so each tool went back to exactly the right place. A family investment. "How much?" I said. Brendan said a number. He said it quietly, smoothly, as though it were a minor detail. $250,000. The room was very still. "Renee," I said. She looked up then. Her eyes were red at the rims, which told me she had either been crying before I arrived or was very close to it now. "Dad," she said. Her voice was careful. "We're not asking you to give it. It would be a loan. Brendan has a structure worked out. You'd be a private lender. There'd be a return." "Against the Timmins project?" "Against the company, yes. Brendan can explain the, I don't need it explained," I said. She flinched slightly. I had not meant it to land hard. But I had worked beside enough men in my life who had done quiet deals with family money, loans with structures worked out, and I had watched most of them lose the money and then lose the family after it, in that order. Brendan was talking again. Something about projected returns, something about a development window, something about timing. I heard the words but I was watching my daughter, the way she held herself at that table, the way she kept her eyes slightly down, the way she breathed like someone who had been coached on how to sit through this conversation. I had taught her to ride a bike in the parking lot of the Hammer Arena. She had been 7 years old and furious with me every time she fell, and then she had gotten it and ridden 3 full laps without stopping and looked back at me with a face so open and triumphant that I had had to turn away so she would not see me affected by it. She was 30 now and she was not looking at me. "I'd need to think about it," I said. "Of course," Brendan said immediately. "Too immediately." "Absolutely. Take your time. We just wanted to get it on your radar because the window on the Timmins piece is closer than we'd like. Ideally, we'd want to move in the next 3 to 4 weeks. 3 to 4 weeks isn't time," I said. "That's a deadline." "It's not a deadline, it's a deadline." He stopped. Something shifted in his face, not much, not enough for Renee to catch if she was not looking directly at him. But I was looking at him. I had spent a career watching men under pressure, watching the difference between what a man's mouth said and what his jaw did when he was not watching it. Brendan's jaw tightened for 1 second and then went smooth again. "Fair enough," he said. "Call it a timeline." We finished dinner. Renee brought out dessert, a store-bought cheesecake still in the plastic shell, which told me the cooking had been effortful enough and she had not had reserves left for more. I ate a small piece and said it was good. She said she had meant to make something but had been busy. I said I knew. Brendan poured himself more wine and talked about hockey for a while. I let him. It was easier than the alternative. Afterward, Renee walked me to the door. Brendan stayed at the table, on his phone. I put on my jacket and she helped me with the collar the way she always did, a small automatic gesture from when I had shoulder trouble 3 winters ago, and she had not dropped the habit. "Dad," she said quietly. "I know," I said. "It's not, he's not trying to," she stopped. "Start it again." We're in a real spot right now. It's been stressful. I believe you, I said. And I did. I believed that she was stressed. I believed that the situation was real. What I did not yet know was the shape of the thing she was in the middle of, and whether she could see that shape from where she was standing. Just think about it, she said. Please. I'll think about it, I said. She hugged me at the door. I held on for a second longer than usual and she let me. Outside, the October air was sharp and smelled like dead leaves and somebody's wood smoke 2 streets over. I sat in the truck for a moment before I started it. I thought about the watch. I had not said anything about it at dinner. I had decided during the chicken that I would not yet, because I did not know enough yet and because naming a thing before you understand it gives the other person time to prepare an answer. My father had told me that once, in a different context, but it applied. The question of how Brendan had gotten into that cedar box was not a small question. I did not leave that house unlocked. Renee had a key, the emergency key, the one I had given her years ago and which I had never thought to take back because she was my daughter and why would I? She had been up in Sudbury in August, the weekend I was in Chapleau helping an old friend clear a property. She had watered the garden and collected the mail. She had been in the house alone for 2 days. I drove home thinking about that and about the number 250,000 and about the way Brendan had said family investment with the specific softness of a man who has practiced the phrase. The highway was dark and straight and the spruce on either side were just shadows against a sky with too many stars for the city. I drove the speed limit. I always drive the speed limit on that road since the night 20 years ago when a moose appeared in my headlights 60 feet ahead and I was doing 120 and I had braked and swerved and come to a stop on the gravel shoulder with my heart doing things I did not know hearts could do. After that, I drove the speed limit. Carol had said at the time that the moose had saved my life by standing in the exact right place. She said things like that. She found the logic of grace in ordinary situations. I had not been able to do that since she died, but I had kept driving the speed limit. I got home at 9:38. The house was cold because I keep the thermostat at 18 when I am not there. I turned it up and put the kettle on and stood in the kitchen in my jacket for a moment. Then I went to the bedroom. The cedar box was on the dresser where it always was, flush against the wall on the left side. I lifted the lid. The box was not empty. There was still tissue paper in it, still the small card my mother had tucked in with the watch when she put it away, still the thin layer of cedar smell that never quite left no matter how long you left the lid open. Everything looked exactly as it should. Except the watch was gone and had been replaced with a watch that was not my father's. It was close. It was the same general shape, a similar metal tone, a similar dial. If I had not known my father's watch the way I knew my own hands, I might have glanced and seen it and believed. Someone had put it there deliberately. Someone had taken the original and left a replacement, hoping I would not notice or would not notice soon enough to matter. I sat on the edge of the bed and held the substitute watch and thought about what that meant. It meant planning. It meant preparation. It meant someone had thought ahead about what I would check, and when, and what I would expect to see, and had arranged accordingly. I set the watch back in the box and closed the lid. My daughter had been in this house in August. That was 8 weeks ago. Long enough to wait and see if I noticed. I had not checked the box in August. I had not checked it since the previous spring, when I had opened it for a reason I could not now remember, to show someone, or to look at it for my own reasons. I could not recall exactly. But the watch had been there in the spring, my father's watch with the crack above the 6, I was certain of it. The kettle had boiled and gone quiet. I did not move. Somewhere between April and August, someone had been in this room. Had opened this box. Had taken a watch that meant nothing to them in dollar terms, that was worth perhaps $60 or $80 at a pawn shop, not more, and had replaced it with a forgery. Not for money. That was the thing that sat wrong. If it had been for money, there was nothing in this house worth the effort. I did not own anything valuable by any conventional measure. which meant someone wanted it for another reason. And the only person who had ever heard me talk about my father's watch, who had sat at the kitchen table as a child and listened to me explain who he was and what the watch meant and why the crack in the crystal above the 6 was not something to be fixed, was Renee. My phone rang. Brendan's name on the screen. I looked at it for 3 rings. Then I answered. Lawrence, he said, friendly, easy, the voice he used when he had already decided something and was calling to see if I had caught up. Sorry to call so late. I just wanted to follow up on something I forgot to mention at dinner. What's that? I said. There's actually a secondary piece to what we're proposing, he said. Something that makes the structure a bit cleaner. On the legal side. A brief pause, textured to sound like consideration. We'd want to formalize your involvement a bit. Just on paper. A limited power of attorney, specific to the investment. So that if anything needed to be executed quickly, we'd have the flexibility to act on your behalf. Standard practice for this kind of private arrangement. I said nothing. Lawrence? You there? I'm here, I said. It's completely standard, he said again. Just a protective measure for everyone. I looked at the cedar box on the dresser. At the watch inside it that was not my father's. At the room my daughter had been alone in for 2 days in August. I'll look into it, I said. Great, he said. That's all I'm asking. He said goodnight and hung up. I sat in the bedroom for a long time after that, in a house that was slowly warming around me, with the sound of the furnace and nothing else, and I tried to think about whether my daughter had been a participant or had been used, and whether, after 6 years of watching Brendan Sutter from the careful distance of a father who had decided not to cause trouble, I had waited too long to ask that question out loud. I did not sleep well that night. I lay in the dark listening to the furnace cycle on and off, and I turned the same few facts over and over, the way you work a splinter you cannot quite get hold of. By 6 in the morning I had made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with a notepad and written down what I knew in the order I knew it. The watch taken and replaced. Renee alone in the house in August. The ask for $250,000. The power of attorney request, made by phone at 10 o'clock at night because it had not been part of the dinner plan and something had caused Brendan to move faster than he had intended. That last part was the one I kept coming back to. He had called because something had shifted his timeline. I thought about that through the first cup of coffee and into the second. I called a man named Paul Desjardins at 8 in the morning. Paul had done my legal work for 15 years, wills and property, and one contract dispute in 2014 that had taken 8 months to resolve and which Paul had handled with the quiet persistence of someone who does not enjoy losing. He answered on the 3rd ring. I told him what had happened. I did not dramatize it. I laid out the sequence and let him listen. When I was finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Lawrence, do not sign anything. Not the loan agreement and especially not any power of attorney document. Not until I have a look at the structure. I told him I had not intended to. Good, he said. I'll make some calls. I spent the next 4 days doing what I always do when I am waiting on something I cannot control. I worked. I cleaned the gutters. I serviced the truck. I split and stacked the remainder of the birch I had cut in September. The work did not stop me thinking, but it gave the thinking somewhere to go, the way physical effort does when you have spent your life doing it. On the 4th day, Paul called back. The Timmins project was real. That much was true. Brendan had a partial stake in a commercial development, a mixed-use building on a lot on Algonquin Boulevard, and the project was behind schedule and over budget, and the primary lender had reduced their commitment 6 weeks earlier, which had created a gap of just over $300,000 that Brendan needed to fill before the end of the construction window or forfeit his position entirely. He stands to lose his investment, Paul said. He's put in roughly $160 of his own, plus whatever he borrowed against the house. If the project fails, he comes out with nothing and the mortgage on the Berry Road property is at risk. How far at risk? I said. Far enough that they'd be looking at selling within a year. I sat with that. The power of attorney request, I said. Yes, Paul said. That one concerns me. The way he described it to you, specific to the investment, it doesn't work that way. A limited POA for an investment vehicle would have no legitimate reason to extend to personal assets. If the language wasn't limited precisely and properly, it could be much broader than what he told you. He was counting on me not knowing that, I said. Possibly, Paul said. Or he was counting on moving fast enough that you didn't ask. I thanked Paul and told him I would be in touch. Then I sat at the kitchen table for a while longer, and I thought about my daughter. Here is what I had not told Paul, because it was not a legal matter. 3 weeks before that Sunday dinner, Renee had called me on a Tuesday evening, and she had not said anything about money or Timmons or loans. She had called because she was worried about a lump she had found and she was waiting on a biopsy result, and she had not told Brendan because he had been so stressed about work and she had not known who else to call. I had listened. I had told her to call me the moment she heard. She had called 3 days later to say it was benign, and she had cried a little on the phone, the relieved kind, and I had said what I could from 300 kilometers away. She had not mentioned the money then either. Whatever the dinner had been, it had come after. I drove back to Barrie on a Thursday. I did not call ahead. I knocked on the door at 2 in the afternoon, when I calculated Brendan would be at his office, and Renee answered in a sweatshirt with her hair pulled back, holding a mug of tea, and she looked surprised, and then something else, something that was not quite relief but was adjacent to it. Dad, she said. I have some time, I said. Thought I'd visit. She let me in. We sat at the kitchen table with tea, and I did not start with the money. I asked how she was feeling. She said better. I said I was glad. She said she had been meaning to call but things had been. She stopped. Brendan's been under a lot of pressure, she said. I know, I said. She looked at me. How much do you know? Enough, I said. Paul Desjardins helped me understand the situation. She set her mug down. Outside the kitchen window, the neighbor's maple was shedding the last of its leaves, and they were coming down slow in the gray October air. He thought you wouldn't check, she said finally. It was not a defense. It was just a fact she was putting on the table. I know he did. The watch was his idea, she said. He said you probably hadn't looked at it in years. He said if you noticed you'd just think you'd misremembered. She picked up her mug and put it down again. I told him it was wrong. I told him twice. He said it was just temporary, that once the project funded he'd buy back the original, that it wasn't a real thing, just a bridge. Where is it? I said. In his office desk, she said. I know which drawer. I nodded. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, I should have told you. When he first brought it up. About the money. I should have called you myself before he arranged that dinner. Why didn't you? I said. She looked at the table. Because I was afraid you'd say no and then it would be my fault for asking. And because things have been hard and I didn't want to see how hard until someone else saw it too. She looked up. That's not an excuse. That's just what was true. It was honest. It cost her something to say it and she said it anyway, which was the thing Carol had always done and which I had always loved about Carol, the willingness to say the thing clearly even when the thing was not flattering to herself. I reached into my jacket pocket and put something on the table. It was a folded paper, a letter I had drafted with Paul's help the previous evening. Not a loan agreement. A different kind of document. Renee looked at it but did not touch it. What is this? She said. It's an offer, I said. Not to Brendan. To you. I had thought about it carefully. Not the $250,000. Not the open-ended structure Brendan had proposed. What I had drafted was a direct gift, properly documented, of $80,000, designated for Renee's personal use, legally separated from Brendan's business interests and protected from business creditors under Ontario family property law. Paul had been thorough. The money could pay her personal share of a mortgage and give her footing of her own, independent of whether Timmons recovered or didn't. It would not save Brendan's investment. It was not designed to. I'm not fixing the project, I said. That's his to solve or lose. But I'm not going to leave you without options. She read the document slowly. She read it twice. When she looked up, her eyes were wet and she did not try to hide it. He's not a bad person, Dad, she said. I know he isn't, I said. And I meant it. A man under financial pressure who makes poor decisions is not the same as a man who is bad. I had worked alongside enough men to know that the distance between desperate and dishonest is shorter than people think, and that most of them knew, on some level, that they had crossed it. The watch was not the act of a calculating predator. It was the act of a frightened man telling himself it was temporary. That did not make it right. But it changed the shape of it. He'll need to return the watch, I said. That's the only thing I'm asking from him directly. She nodded. And the power of attorney, I said. That doesn't happen. I don't care how he structures the ask. No, she said. I know. I told him that one was too far. He knows it too, I think, now. We sat there for a while. The tea went cold. She made more. We did not talk about Brendan again that afternoon. She told me about a woman she'd been doing some part-time bookkeeping for, a small landscaping company, and how she had found she was good at it and was thinking about getting certified. I told her that was worth pursuing. She asked about the house and I said the gutters were clear and the birch was stacked and it would be a good winter. She said she missed it sometimes, the sound of that house in winter, the way the pipes knocked in the cold. I drove home in the early evening with the headlights on and the highway dark ahead of me. 2 weeks later, Brendan came to Sudbury alone. He knocked on the door on a Saturday morning and stood on the step in his good shoes looking like a man who had practiced what he was going to say and then abandoned the script at the last moment. He held out my father's watch. I took it and held it in my hand for a second, feeling the familiar weight of it, the small asymmetry of the winding crown, the crack in the crystal above the 6 that I could have found with my eyes closed. I'm sorry, Lawrence, he said. He meant it. I could tell when a man meant it. I had been reading men for 66 years and the tells were not complicated if you paid attention. The stillness in the shoulders. The voice that did not add anything to the apology because there was nothing useful to add. I know you are, I said. I did not tell him it was fine, because it was not fine. But I did not close the door on him either, because Renee was inside that marriage and she was working on something. And the worst thing I could do for her future was make it impossible for the people in her life to find their way back to better. He left after 20 minutes. Renee called that evening. He told me, she said. Good, I said. Thank you, she said. For all of it. The way you handled it. I did not tell her it was nothing, because it was not nothing. It had cost me sleep and several $100s in legal fees and 3 weeks of sitting with an anger I had not allowed myself to fully feel because I was not ready to act on it yet. But I also did not want her to carry the weight of that, so I said what was true and not the whole truth. Your mother would have handled it better, I said. She laughed a little, the wet kind. She would have, Renee agreed. She would have figured it out 2 weeks earlier and somehow made Brendan feel like it was his own idea to do the right thing. She was better at people than I am, I said. You're not bad at people, Dad, she said. You're just slow. She meant it as a tease, the way she had always teased, and I took it the way I always had, which was with the knowledge that slow and careful are often the same thing and that people who move fast break more than they fix. I put my father's watch back in the cedar box that night. I set it on the tissue paper my mother had folded around it 31 years ago and I closed the lid and put the box back flush against the left side of the dresser. I left the light on for a while before I slept. I do not know why. Sometimes the house needs a few extra minutes to settle. My father used to say there were 2 kinds of men, those who replace a thing and hope no one notices, and those who go back and make it right. He was talking about a job he had done on a fence once, a corner post he had set wrong and had to pull and reset at his own cost. He was not making a general statement about character. He was just telling a story about a fence. But I had thought about it more than once in the week since October, and I had decided that the part he never said out loud was the important part. The second kind of man still made the mistake. He still set the post wrong. The difference was only in what he did next. That is not a small difference. It is, in fact, the whole thing.